The system crash happened at exactly 10:47 a.m. I know because I was staring at my phone when Jason's entire empire, our empire, went dark in front of 2,000 investors, 300 journalists, and God knows how many people watching the live stream. But here's the thing, nobody knew yet. I'm the one who pressed the button. Me, the just a housewife, who apparently wasn't smart enough to understand her own husband's business anymore. Let me back up 30 minutes, because you need to understand how satisfying this moment really was. I was standing backstage at the tech conference. You know, one of those obscene Silicon Valley productions with the LED walls and the pulsing electronic music and the overpriced matcha lattes. Jason was about to announce the IPO, $2 billion. That's what 15 years of my code, my late nights, my genius was supposedly worth, except my name wasn't anywhere on those documents. And standing next to him, laughing at some inside joke I wasn't part of, was Jessica, his VP of marketing, his fucking mistress. I felt my phone buzz in my clutch. A text from Jason, "Sarah, we need to talk after this. Stay backstage." And then, like he was handing me a parking ticket, a courier walked up with an envelope. Divorce papers. Right there. 30 minutes before the biggest moment of his career, our career, he served me divorce papers. Jessica glanced over, and I swear to God, I saw her smirk. She knew. Of course she knew. And Jason. He adjusted his tie in the mirror, practiced his smile, and said without even looking at me, "You've been an anchor, Sarah. I need wings now. The engineers rebuilt everything anyway. Your code was outdated. We don't need you anymore." I stood there in my dress, the one I'd bought special for today, the one I thought would make me feel like a partner again instead of invisible. And something inside me just crystallized. Not rage. Rage is hot and messy. This was cold. Surgical. I walked out of that building, got into an Uber, opened my laptop, and typed one command, revoke admin, access, enter. Then I added the encryption layer, the one with my biometric lock, the one that meant nobody, not Jason, not his hotshot engineers, not fucking Jessica with her marketing degree, could touch the Nebula core without me. And then I watched. Jason walk onto that stage with his practiced smile and his confident voice, talking about our revolutionary technology and the future we've built. He clicked the remote to show the demo. The screens went black. All of them. The main display. The backup systems. Every device running our software worldwide. And in the center of that massive LED wall, in letters 10 feet high, appeared the message I'd programmed. Proprietary code. Creator authorization required. The gasps from the audience sounded like a wave crashing. I heard it through my earbuds, watching the live stream from the back of that Uber. Jason's face went from confident to confused to absolutely terrified in about 3 seconds. The stock ticker, the one that was supposed to open at $50 a share, started dropping before it even launched. By the time I got home, analysts were already calling it the biggest tech disaster since Theranos. And me? I was sitting on my couch, folding laundry like the good little housewife I was supposed to be, waiting for my phone to ring. Because, it was going to ring. And when it did, Jason was going to learn something I should have taught him 15 years ago. Never, ever underestimate the woman who built your kingdom, especially when she still holds all the keys. 15 years ago, I was 23 and stupid in love. That's the only explanation for why I believed him. Jason and I met in a coffee shop near campus. I was finishing my PhD in computer science. He was dropping out of his MBA program because he said formal education was killing his entrepreneurial spirit, which really meant he'd rather pitch ideas than actually build anything. But God, he was charming. He had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room, like your brain was the most fascinating thing he'd ever encountered. And when I told him about my thesis an algorithm that could predict system failures before they happened, essentially teaching computers to self-heal. His eyes lit up like I'd just handed him a winning lottery ticket. 3 months later, I was pregnant with Emma. 6 months after that, we were in his parents' garage in Palo Alto, and I was the one hunched over a dying laptop at 2 a.m. while Jason paced behind me, talking on the phone with potential investors. Yes, sir. We're on the cutting edge of predictive technology. Revolutionary. Absolutely. My team is working around the clock. His team. It was me. Just me. My back aching, my ankles swollen, typing code while our daughter kicked inside me like she was trying to debug it herself. But I didn't mind. Not then. Because Jason would bring me decaf coffee and kiss my forehead and say, "Baby, you're building the future. Our future." And I believed him. The Nebula Core took me 11 months to complete. 11 months of translating theoretical mathematics into functional code, of building fail-safes and redundancies, of creating something that had never existed before. When I finally ran the first successful test, the system identifying and fixing a critical error in 0.3 seconds, I cried. Not from exhaustion, though God knows I was exhausted. From pride. I'd actually done it. Jason was there, and he picked me up and spun me around, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. Then he said, "Okay, now we need to talk about the business structure." That's when he pulled out the incorporation papers. He'd already filed them. The company, Novatech Solutions, was in his name. Just his. I remember staring at the documents, confusion mixing with something that tasted like betrayal. "Jason, what is this? We're supposed to be partners. 50-50 you said." He sat down next to me, took my hands, used that voice he always used when he needed me to agree to something. "Sarah, listen, you know how VCs are. They see a woman founder, especially a pregnant woman, and they get nervous. They think you're going to bail, go full-time mom, stop caring about the business. It's sexist as hell, I know, but it's reality. If my name is on the paperwork, we'll get funded 10 times faster. Once we have the money, once we're established, we'll fix it. I promise. We're a team. What's mine is yours." I should have fought harder. I should have hired a lawyer, drawn up contracts, protected myself. But Emma was 2 weeks old. I hadn't slept more than 3 hours straight in days. And Jason was already booking meetings with investors who wanted to throw money at us. So I said, okay. I signed a simple licensing agreement that gave Novatech temporary use of my code. Temporary. That was 15 years ago. And you know what? He was right about one thing. The VCs loved him. They loved his pitch, his confidence, his vision of disrupting the infrastructure industry. They wrote checks, big ones. And Jason, he hired a team of engineers, moved us into a real office, started wearing expensive suits. Meanwhile, I stayed home with Emma, then with Lucas 2 years later, telling myself I was still part of it, that my name would go on the patents eventually, that Jason wouldn't actually forget who built the foundation of his entire company. But sitting there on my couch, watching his IPO collapse in real time on CNN, I wasn't thinking about the garage anymore. I was thinking about 3 weeks ago, when I'd asked him about finally adding my name to the corporate documents now that the kids were older. He'd laughed. Actually laughed. "Sarah, you haven't touched code in a decade. The engineering team rebuilt everything from scratch. Your original work was, let's call it a prototype. This is a real company now. Maybe just focus on what you're good at, the home stuff." That's when I knew. I'd never been a partner. I'd been a stepping stone. And now, watching the news anchors describe the catastrophic failure and the emergency trading halt, I smiled. Because Jason was about to learn that you can't rebuild a foundation when the original architect still owns the blueprints. The call came 18 minutes after the crash. Not to me. God, no. Jason was way too panicked to think strategically. But I could hear everything anyway, because I'd kept one tiny administrative privilege he didn't know about: access to the conference room security feed. Old habits from the early days when I used to monitor system tests remotely while nursing Lucas. So there I was, laptop open on my kitchen counter, watching Jason absolutely lose his mind in real time while I made myself a cup of tea. Earl Grey. Because if you're going to watch your husband's empire burn, you might as well be civilized about it. What the fuck do you mean you can't access it? Jason was screaming at Marcus, the CTO he'd hired 3 years ago. Some hotshot from Google who supposedly understood scalable architecture better than anyone. Marcus looked like he was about to vomit. His fingers were flying across his laptop, but even from the grainy security camera, I could see the helplessness in his face. Jason, I'm telling you, the source code is gone. Not deleted, encrypted, military grade, from what I can tell. And the encryption key, it's biometric. It's not responding to any of our credentials. Jason slammed his hand on the conference table so hard his water bottle jumped. Then use the fucking backup servers! We have redundancies for this exact— The backups are encrypted too, Marcus interrupted, his voice cracking. Everything, every single repository, every clone, every archive. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. They locked us out at the architectural level. I took a sip of my tea. Military grade was underselling it, honestly. I'd built that encryption myself, back when I was paranoid about corporate espionage and Jason kept hiring engineers without proper NDAs. The biometric key was tied to my fingerprint and retinal scan. I'd told Jason about it years ago, framed it as a security measure to protect our IP. He'd nodded distractedly and gone back to his email. Men like Jason never pay attention to the details. That's why they need women like me. Well, needed. Jessica walked into the frame, and I felt my jaw clench. She was still wearing that cream-colored suit, the one that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe, and she had the audacity to look annoyed rather than terrified. Jason, we need damage control. I've got Bloomberg and TechCrunch blowing up my phone. What do I tell them? Jason whirled on her, and for a second, I saw something I'd never seen before. He looked at her the way he used to look at me when I couldn't solve a problem, like she was useless. Tell them. Tell them what, Jessica? That we just lost $2 billion because someone— He stopped. I watched the exact moment the realization hit him. His face went white. Oh my God. Sarah. Marcus looked up, confused. Sarah? Your wife, Sarah. Jason was already pulling out his phone, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped it. She wrote the original Nebula Core years ago, before we— Fuck. Jessica's perfectly made-up face twisted into something ugly. Wait, your housewife did this. Jason, you said she didn't even understand the business anymore. You said— I know what I fucking said. Jason was dialing now, pressing the phone to his ear. I watched him wait, and wait. And of course, I didn't answer. My phone was sitting right next to my laptop, buzzing with his name, and I just watched it. Each unanswered ring felt like a tiny act of revenge. When it went to voicemail, I saw him close his eyes like he was in physical pain. Behind them, through the glass walls of the conference room, I could see chaos erupting across the office. Employees clustered around monitors, pointing at error messages. Someone from legal rushed in with a tablet, shoving it in Jason's face. The investors are threatening to sue for fraud. They're saying we misrepresented the security of our intellectual property. And the board? Jason, the board is calling an emergency meeting. They want you in the main auditorium in 30 minutes. Jason looked like a man drowning. He tried calling me again. Again, I let it ring. On the security feed, I watched Jessica put her hand on his shoulder, and he actually shrugged it off. Don't. Go handle the press. Tell them it's a sophisticated external attack. Tell them we're working with cybersecurity experts. Tell them anything except the truth. Jessica's face went cold, but she nodded and left. Smart woman, knowing when to retreat. not smart enough to realize she'd hitched her wagon to the Titanic. Marcus cleared his throat carefully, like he was afraid Jason might actually hit him. Jason, even if we get in touch with Sarah, even if she agrees to restore access, the damage is done. The stock was supposed to open at $50 a share. Pre-market trading has it at $8 and falling. We've lost investor confidence. The IPO is dead. Jason sank into a chair, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked small, defeated. I should have felt satisfied. I did feel satisfied. But there was also this tiny, traitorous part of me that remembered the garage, remembered believing in us, remembered thinking we were building something together. That part whispered, maybe you should answer. Maybe this has gone far enough. But then I remembered Jessica's smirk. I remembered the divorce papers. I remembered it just a housewife, and we don't need you anymore. And I set my phone to silent, refreshed the security feed, and waited for Jason to realize that 30 minutes wasn't going to be nearly enough time to fix what he'd broken. My phone had stopped buzzing around call number 17. Jason had moved on to texts. They started professional. Sarah, we need to talk urgently. Then desperate. Please pick up. This is serious. And finally descended into what I can only describe as digital begging. Sarah, I'm sorry. Whatever I did, I'm sorry. Just call me back. I screenshotted every single one. Not for legal reasons, though my lawyer would probably appreciate them. No, I screenshotted them because I wanted to remember this feeling. The feeling of watching a man who'd made me feel powerless for 15 years suddenly realize he'd never had any power at all. He'd just been borrowing mine. The news coverage was getting brutal. I had CNN on the TV, my laptop showing the security feed, and my tablet cycling through financial news sites. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion, except the car was a Ferrari and the driver was my husband and I was the one who'd cut the brake lines. CNBC had already brought in some crisis management expert who was explaining, in that calm, devastating way experts have, that Novatech's valuation had just evaporated because the fundamental integrity of their core technology is now in question. The ticker at the bottom of the screen showed the pre-market price, $4.23 and dropping, from $2 billion to, I did the math quickly, roughly $300 million. In less than an hour. The expert continued, what's particularly concerning is that this appears to be an internal security failure, not an external hack. Investors hate internal failures. It suggests incompetence at the executive level. I laughed out loud at that. Incompetence. That was one word for it. Arrogance was another. Stupidity was a third. You know what's funny about building something revolutionary? People always assume it's complicated, that it requires a whole team of geniuses working in concert. But the Nebula core wasn't complicated. It was elegant. That was its genius. I'd designed it so efficiently that the entire architecture rested on a few thousand lines of foundational code. Everything Jason's team had built over the years, all their improvements and scaling solutions, they were just decorations on my house. And I'd just locked every door and window and swallowed the key. My laptop pinged with a notification. The security feed showed Jason literally running through the office, his jacket flapping behind him like a cape, his hair, which he'd spent 20 minutes styling this morning, now sticking up in sweaty spikes. He burst into the auditorium where apparently the board had assembled, and even without audio, I could read the room. 15 people in expensive suits, all of them looking at Jason like he'd personally set their money on fire. The chairman, Richard something, old money from Boston, the kind of man who wore cufflinks to Zoom calls, stood at the head of the table with his arms crossed. Jason was gesturing frantically, probably trying to explain, but Richard just held up one hand. Stop. Then Richard pointed at his watch. I couldn't hear the ultimatum. But I didn't need to. The body language said everything. Fix this now, or you're done. That's when my doorbell rang. I knew who it was before I even checked the camera. Jason's BMW was in my driveway. He must have broken every speed limit between downtown and our house in Atherton. 22 minutes from the office. That had to be a record. I took my time walking to the door, letting him ring twice more. When I finally opened it, he looked destroyed. His tie was loose, his shirt had sweat stains under the arms, and his eyes were wild. Behind him, I noticed Jessica wasn't in the car. Interesting. Trouble in Mistress Paradise already. Sarah. His voice was hoarse, like he'd been yelling, or maybe begging. Sarah, what did you do? What the fuck did you do? I leaned against the door frame, blocking his entry, and gave him my calmest smile. The one I used to use when the kids were toddlers having meltdowns. I exercised my rights as the creator and IP holder of the Nebula Core architecture. Why? Is there a problem? His face went from red to purple. A problem? Sarah, you just destroyed $2 billion. You crashed the entire company. Do you have any idea what you've... Actually, I interrupted. I crashed your company, not mine. I don't have a company, remember? I'm just a housewife. That's what you said this morning. Or was it yesterday? The days blur together when you're folding laundry. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again like a fish drowning in air. Then, and this is the part that almost made me laugh, he tried to push past me into the house. My house. The one he'd been planning to take in the divorce. According to those papers I'd skimmed backstage. I didn't budge. Jason, you served me divorce papers 2 hours ago. You are no longer welcome in this home without my permission. And right now, I'm not feeling particularly welcoming. His eyes actually filled with tears. Crocodile tears. Probably, but still. Sarah, please. The board gave me 1 hour. 1 hour to restore system access, or they're terminating me for cause and filing criminal charges for fraud. They're saying I misrepresented our security protocols to investors. I could go to prison. He grabbed my hands, and I let him. Mostly because I wanted to feel if they were shaking. They were, I need you to turn it back on. Please. I'm begging you. I looked down at his hands, the hands that used to write equations on napkins with me in coffee shops, the hands that had held our babies, the hands that had probably touched Jessica in ways I didn't want to imagine, and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no residual love. Just cold, clear purpose. Jason, I said softly, pulling my hands away. You told me the engineers rebuilt everything. You told me my code was outdated. So why do you need me? His face crumpled. I lied. They tried to rebuild it, but they couldn't. Your architecture it's too integrated, too elegant. Every time they tried to replace a section, something else would break. So they just built on top of it. The whole company runs on your foundation. My foundation, I repeated. My code, my genius, my late nights, my sacrifices. Yes, he whispered. Yes, all of that. And I'm sorry. God, Sarah, I'm so sorry. Just please, get off my porch, Jason. His head snapped up. What? I stepped back and started closing the door. You have 53 minutes left. I suggest you spend them figuring out what you're going to tell the board. Because here's the thing you never understood about me, sweetheart. I don't bluff. I don't make empty threats. When I build something, it stays built. And when I burn something down, I smiled at him through the narrowing gap. It stays burned. Unless, of course, I decide otherwise. I closed the door in his face and turned the deadbolt. Through the wood, I heard him shout, "What do you want? Money? Equity? Just tell me what you fucking want." But I didn't answer. Because honestly, I hadn't decided yet. And watching him panic while I figured it out was honestly the most fun I'd had in years. He didn't leave. Of course he didn't leave. Jason had never been good at accepting defeat. It's what made him a decent CEO and an absolutely terrible husband. Through the front window, I watched him pace my driveway like a caged animal, phone pressed to his ear, probably getting screamed at by Richard or Marcus or some lawyer. Every few minutes, he'd stop and stare at my door like he was considering breaking it down. Good luck with that, buddy. We'd installed reinforced steel cores after that home invasion scare in Palo Alto 3 years ago. You know, back when you still pretended to care about my safety. I made myself a sandwich, turkey and Swiss on sourdough. I'd just taken the first bite when I heard it. The garage door opening. My garage door. The fucking audacity of this man. He still had his opener. I'd meant to deactivate it after seeing those divorce papers. But honestly, I'd been a little busy committing corporate sabotage. I heard his car pull in, heard the door to the mudroom open, and then there he was, standing in my kitchen like he still lived here. Like he still had rights. His eyes landed on my sandwich, then my laptop, still open to the security feed, still showing the chaos at Novatech headquarters. And something in his face just broke. "You're eating," he said, his voice hollow. "The company is collapsing. Our lives are falling apart. And you're eating a fucking sandwich." I took another bite, chewed slowly, swallowed. Well, it's past noon. I get cranky when my blood sugar drops. Want half? His hands clenched into fists at his sides, and for a second, just a second, I wondered if he might actually hit me. We'd never been that kind of couple. He'd never raised a hand to me, never even raised his voice much until today. But there's a first time for everything, and I could see him calculating whether assault charges would be worse than fraud charges. Apparently, fraud won, because he just stood there, breathing hard, looking at me like I was a stranger. "The kids," he finally said. "Sarah, think about Emma and Lucas. If Novatech goes under, if I go to prison, what happens to their college funds? Their future? Emma wants to go to Stanford. That's $60,000 a year. Lucas needs..." Stop. I set down my sandwich, and something in my voice made him actually shut up. "Don't you dare use our children as emotional leverage. Emma's college fund is in a trust under my name. Has been since she was born. So is Lucas's. Money I saved from the early consulting work I did before you convinced me to quit and focus on the family. So their futures are fine. Your future, however, is looking pretty bleak." He pulled out a chair and sat down without asking, his legs apparently giving out. Up close, he looked even worse than he had on my porch. There were actual bags under his eyes. His shirt had a coffee stain I hadn't noticed before, and his hands were shaking so badly he had to clasp them together on the table. "What do you want?" he asked again. But this time there was no anger in it. Just defeat. Just exhaustion. "I'll give you anything. 50% of the company. 60? 70? Just name your price and turn the system back on." I leaned back in my chair, studying him. This man I'd loved for 15 years. This man who'd held my hand during labor, who'd cried when Emma said her first word, who'd slow danced with me in the kitchen to old jazz records on Sunday mornings. This man who'd also erased my name from our company, fucked his VP of marketing, and handed me divorce papers on what should have been our triumph day. How do you reconcile those two people? How do you love someone and hate them at the exact same time? "You really don't get it, do you?" I said quietly. "This isn't about money, Jason. I don't want your equity. I don't want your shares. I'm not trying to steal your company." "Then what?" He looked up at me. And God help me. There were actual tears on his face now. "What do you want? Revenge? Is that it? You want to watch me suffer?" "No." I stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the perfectly manicured lawn that I'd had zero time to maintain because I was too busy being a full-time mother and part-time CFO and full-time ghost. "I want what you took from me. I want recognition. I want the world to know that Sarah Vance, Not Jason Vance, not Novatech's brilliant engineering team, but me, created the Nebula Core. I want my name on the patents. I want the articles and the interviews and the Wikipedia page to say, developed by Sarah Mitchell Vance. I want the fucking credit. The silence behind me was so long I thought maybe he'd left. When I turned around, he was staring at the table, his jaw working like he was chewing glass. "You want me to admit it publicly," he said slowly. "You want me to go back to that conference, get on that stage, and tell everyone that I've been lying for 15 years. Not lying, I corrected. Omitting, minimizing, taking credit for work you didn't do. But yes, essentially." His head shot up. "Sarah, that will destroy me. My reputation, my credibility, everything I've built. Everything we built," I snapped. "Everything I built while you took meetings and did press tours and fucked your marketing director?" He flinched like I'd slapped him. "Good. How long?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "How long have you been sleeping with Jessica?" He opened his mouth, probably to deny it. But I held up my phone. "I have the hotel receipts. Jason, company credit card. You weren't even smart enough to hide it. So, how long?" His shoulders sagged. 8 months. 8 months. While I was home with Lucas through his appendicitis. While I was organizing Emma's college tours. While I was being the perfect wife and mother and invisible woman. "Did you love her?" I don't know why I asked. Maybe I needed to know if I'd been replaced or just supplemented. "I don't know," he said. And somehow, that was worse than yes. She made me feel young, important. Like I was still the guy who could change the world, not just the guy who got lucky 15 years ago. "You didn't get lucky," I said. "You got me." His phone buzzed on the table, probably the board wondering where the hell he was, and he looked at it like it was a live grenade. 30 minutes, he whispered. "I have 30 minutes before they fire me, before they call the SEC, before everything ends." He looked up at me with those eyes that used to make me melt. "If I do this, if I go back and tell the truth, will you turn it back on? Will you save the company?" I walked over to him, leaned down so we were eye level, and smiled. Not a kind smile. "That depends on how convincing your confession is. See, I don't want a half-assed admission buried in corporate speak. I want you to look into those cameras, with all those journalists and investors watching, and tell them exactly who built their precious Nebula Core. Tell them about the garage. Tell them about the all-nighters while you slept. Tell them everything." His face went pale. "That's... Sarah, that's career suicide." "No," I corrected, standing back up. "That's honesty. And if you'd tried it 15 years ago, we wouldn't be here." I picked up my laptop, snapped it shut. "Clock's ticking. Jason, better hurry." He stood up so fast his chair fell backward. For a moment, we just stared at each other across my kitchen. This room where we'd had 1,000 breakfasts, where we'd made plans and promises and a life that apparently meant nothing to him. Then he turned and ran. I heard the garage door, heard his engine roar to life, heard him peel out of the driveway like the hounds of hell were chasing him. And maybe they were. Maybe I was those hounds. I walked to the living room, turned on the TV, and waited. Because either Jason was about to commit professional suicide on live television, or he was about to call my bluff. And honestly, I had no idea which option excited me more. He made it back to the conference center in 14 minutes. I know because I was tracking his Tesla through the app. Yes, I still had access to that too. Another little oversight in Jason's grand plan to erase me from his life. I watched the little blue dot race down 101, weaving through traffic like a man possessed, and part of me wondered if he'd even go through with it. Jason's ego was the size of a small planet. Asking him to publicly admit he'd been riding my coattails for 15 years was like asking him to cut off his own arm, but then again, Prison jumpsuits aren't exactly his color, so maybe survival instinct would win. The live stream was still running. Apparently, the conference organizers had decided the disaster was too good not to broadcast. And when Jason burst back into the auditorium, the camera caught everything. He looked like he'd been through a war. His hair was a mess, his tie was gone completely now, and there was this wild, cornered animal look in his eyes that probably terrified the board members still sitting in the front row. Richard stood up, his face carved from stone. "Mr. Vance, you have 7 minutes remaining. I assume you're here to tell us you've resolved the situation?" Jason walked straight past him to the stage, didn't answer, didn't explain, just grabbed the microphone from the podium like it was a life preserver, and he was drowning. "I need to make a statement," Jason said, his voice echoing through the half-empty auditorium. Most of the investors had left, but the journalists? Oh, they'd stayed. Of course they'd stayed. Nothing sells like a tech disaster, and this was shaping up to be legendary. I saw phones come out, cameras swivel toward the stage. Bloomberg, TechCrunch, the Wall Street Journal, they were all there, ready to document his humiliation or his salvation, depending on what came out of his mouth next. 15 years ago, Jason started, and then stopped. His hand was gripping the microphone so hard his knuckles were white. I leaned forward on my couch, barely breathing. "Come on, Jason, say it. Say the words." 15 years ago, I didn't start this company alone. His voice cracked on the word alone, and I felt something twist in my chest. Not sympathy, God, no. But something. Recognition, maybe. That this was costing him everything he'd built his identity on. The Nebula Core, the algorithm that every single one of our products is built on, wasn't created by me. It wasn't created by our engineering team. It was created by my wife, Sarah Mitchell Vance, in our garage while she was pregnant with our first child. She wrote every line of code. She solved every problem. She built the foundation of this entire company while I made PowerPoints and took meetings. The auditorium went so quiet you could hear the cameras clicking. Richard's face was unreadable, but I saw several board members exchange glances. Jason kept going, and I realized he wasn't reading from notes. This was raw, unscripted, real. The system crashed today because Sarah revoked access, her access to her code, because He stopped, closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were pointed directly at one of the cameras, like he was talking to me, like he knew I was watching. Because I tried to erase her. I put my name on the patents. I took credit in every interview, every article, every pitch meeting. I told investors I was the technical genius behind Novatech, when the truth is, I barely understand half of what the Nebula Core does. And this morning, hours before our IPO, I served her divorce papers and told her she was just a housewife, that we didn't need her anymore. Oh, Jason. I pressed my hand to my mouth, not sure if I was laughing or crying or both. He'd actually done it. He'd actually thrown himself on the sword. On live television, with Bloomberg recording every word. His career wasn't just over, it was vaporized. So the system crashed because I'm a liar and a thief, Jason continued, his voice steady now, resigned. And if you're looking for someone to blame for losing $2 billion today, blame me. Not the technology, not the team. Me. Because I took credit for genius that wasn't mine, and today, the actual genius decided she was done being invisible. He set the microphone down on the podium with a soft thunk that the speakers picked up, amplified, made final. And then I did something I'd been planning for the last 27 minutes. I picked up my laptop, opened the command terminal, and typed, "Restore admin access," my fingerprint on the reader, my retinal scan through the webcam, execute. On the TV screen, behind Jason's defeated figure, The massive LED wall that had been black for over an hour suddenly blazed to life. The Novatech logo appeared, then the Nebula Core interface, then system after system coming back online in a cascade of green check marks. The auditorium gasped, literally gasped, like they were watching a magic trick. Jason turned around slowly, saw the screens, and his shoulders dropped about 6 inches. Relief, terror, gratitude, disbelief. All of it played across his face in the space of a heartbeat. But I wasn't done. Not even close. Because Jason had just given me exactly what I wanted. And now it was time to take everything else. The relief in that auditorium lasted exactly 45 seconds. I know because I counted. 45 seconds of board members exhaling, of journalists frantically typing, of Jason standing on that stage looking like a man who'd just been pulled from the gallows at the last possible moment. Then Richard walked up to the microphone, and the temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. Even through the TV screen, I could feel it. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. "Mr. Vance," Richard said, his Boston Brahmin accent making every syllable sound like a judicial ruling. "Thank you for your candor. The board appreciates your honesty, however belated." He paused, and I swear I could see Jason's lawyer in the front row physically cringing. "However, honesty doesn't change the fact that you committed securities fraud. You misrepresented the ownership of our core intellectual property to investors. You signed documents, under oath, claiming full rights to technology you've just admitted you don't own. The SEC will have a field day with this." Jason's face went from relieved to ashen in about 2 seconds. "Richard, I can fix this. Sarah and I can work out a licensing agreement, a retroactive contract." "Can you?" Richard turned to look at the nearest camera, and I realized with a jolt that he was talking to me. "Mrs. Vance, if you're watching, and I suspect you are, the board of Novatech would very much like to speak with you, at your earliest convenience." I muted the TV and laughed. Oh, this was beautiful. This was better than I'd even planned. They didn't just want Jason gone, they wanted me. Of course they did. I was the only person on the planet who could guarantee the Nebula Core wouldn't mysteriously encrypt itself again in 6 months. I was the insurance policy, the golden goose, the person they should have been negotiating with 15 years ago. My phone rang. Unknown number. I let it ring 3 times before answering, just to make them sweat. Sarah Vance speaking. "Mrs. Vance, this is Richard Ashworth, chairman of Novatech's board. I apologize for the dramatic nature of this call, but we find ourselves in an unusual situation." His voice was smooth, practiced, the voice of a man who'd negotiated billion-dollar deals in his sleep. "I'm aware of the situation, Mr. Ashworth. I created it." There was a pause, and I could almost hear him recalculating his approach. Men like Richard weren't used to people, especially women, being so direct. "Indeed. Mrs. Vance, we need to discuss the ownership structure of the Nebula Core. Your husband's confession has created significant legal exposure for the company. We need to remediate that immediately." "Ex-husband," I corrected. "He served me divorce papers this morning, remember? So technically, Jason and I are no longer a unit, which means any licensing agreement he signed on my behalf is void. Which means, Mr. Ashworth, that Novatech is currently operating on my intellectual property without my permission. How does that feel?" Another pause. Longer this time. When he spoke again, the smooth charm was gone, replaced by something harder. "What do you want, Mrs. Vance?" What did I want? That was the question, wasn't it? I'd spent the last 3 hours focused on making Jason hurt, on making him admit what he'd taken from me. But I hadn't actually thought beyond that. Revenge is funny that way. It's so consuming that you forget to plan for after. I looked around my living room, at the photos on the wall. Emma and Lucas at Disneyland. Our family Christmas card from last year. Everyone smiling like we were perfect. Jason and me on our wedding day, young and stupid and convinced we were going to change the world together. I want a seat at the table, I heard myself say. Not as Jason's wife, not as a consultant, as a board member with full voting rights. I want my name on every patent, every document, every piece of press material that mentions the Nebula Core. I want back pay, 15 years of it, at CTO rates. And I want Jason's resignation. Mrs. Vance? Richard started, but I wasn't finished. I'm not done. I also want a formal investigation into how company resources were used. Specifically, I want to know how many business trips went to the Ritz-Carlton were actually business, and how much company money Jason spent on his affair with Jessica Chen. And when that investigation is complete, I want her fired too. For ethics violations, hostile work environment, whatever you need to call it. But I want her gone. The silence on the other end was so profound I thought the call had dropped. Then, that's quite a list. That's my price for not pulling the plug permanently, I said sweetly. You have until market open tomorrow to decide. That gives you... I checked my watch. 16 hours. Good luck, Mr. Ashworth. I hung up before he could respond, and my hands were shaking so badly I had to set the phone down. Holy shit, had I really just done that? Had I really just blackmailed the board of a multi-billion-dollar company? On the TV, still muted, I watched Richard return to the microphone. He was speaking to Jason, but Jason wasn't looking at him. Jason was staring at his phone, and even from the bad angle of the security camera, I could see the message he'd just received. Probably from Richard. Probably something like, "Your wife is a goddamn nightmare," or, "We're going to need that resignation in writing." Jason looked up at the camera, the same one he'd confessed to earlier, and this time, there was no defeat in his eyes. There was rage. Pure, incandescent rage. And I smiled at the screen, at him, at the man who'd underestimated me for the last time, and thought, good. Now you know how it feels. The call came at 6:47 a.m. I know because I hadn't slept, and I'd been watching the clock tick toward market open like it was a countdown to either my coronation or my destruction. 16 hours had felt like 16 years. I'd spent the night reading every contract I'd ever signed, or rather, hadn't signed, documenting every email, every text, every piece of evidence that proved the Nebula Core was mine. My lawyer, a vicious little woman named Patricia Chen, who I'd hired at 11 p.m., had spent the night doing the same. When my phone finally rang with Richard's number, Patricia was sitting across from me at my kitchen table, her eyes sharp as knives. I put it on speaker. "Mrs. Vance, the board has reached a decision." Richard's voice sounded like he'd aged a decade overnight. "Good. We accept your terms with the following modifications. You'll join the board effective immediately with full voting rights. All patents will be amended to list you as primary inventor. Back pay will be calculated and transferred within 30 days. Jessica Chen's employment contract will be reviewed by an independent investigator, and appropriate action will be taken based on findings." He paused, and I could hear papers shuffling. However, regarding Jason's resignation, the board feels that an immediate termination would create too much instability. We'd like to propose a transition period of 90 days. Patricia's eyes met mine across the table. She shook her head almost imperceptibly. "No compromises. Not now." "Mr. Ashworth," I said, my voice calm as glass, "let me be very clear. Jason Vance doesn't get 90 days. He doesn't get 90 hours. He gets until 9:30 a.m., when the market opens, to submit his resignation and clear his office. If he's still employed by Novatech when that opening bell rings, I will encrypt the Nebula Core again, and this time I'll do it permanently. I'll license the technology to your competitors. Maybe Microsoft, maybe Amazon. Maybe I'll just open source the whole thing and let the world have it for free. Your choice." The silence was so heavy I could feel it through the phone. Then, quietly, almost admiringly, You're quite serious. Dead serious. And Mr. Ashworth, one more thing. I want to be the one who tells him, not HR, not the board, me. Patricia's eyebrows shot up. We hadn't discussed this part, and I could see her mentally calculating whether it was legally stupid. But I didn't care. Jason had humiliated me in front of hundreds of people. Turnabout was fair play. That's highly irregular, Richard said carefully. I'm sure it is. Do we have a deal? Or should I start making calls to AWS? We have a deal, Mrs. Vance. I'll have the paperwork drawn up within the hour. And Mrs. Vance? He paused. Welcome to the board. Try not to destroy us in your first week. He hung up, and I just sat there for a moment, staring at my phone like it might explode. Patricia reached across the table and gripped my hand. Holy shit, Sarah. You just pulled off the corporate coup of the century. She wasn't wrong. In less than 24 hours, I'd gone from divorced housewife to board member, from invisible to unavoidable. But I wasn't done. Not yet. Jason's house, his new house, the one he'd apparently bought 6 months ago in preparation for his new life with Jessica, was in Los Gatos. 45 minutes from Atherton if you hit traffic. 30 if you drove like you had nothing left to lose. I made it in 28. The house was one of those modern glass boxes that looked like a spaceship had mated with a restoration hardware catalog. Hideous. Expensive. So very Jason. I rang the doorbell at 8:15 a.m., and when he opened it, he was still in his pajamas. Silk pajamas. Jesus Christ. Who had he become? Sarah. He looked genuinely shocked to see me, which was almost funny considering I'd just blackmailed his entire board of directors. Oh, what are you? You can't be here. This is my private residence. Relax, Jason. I'm not here to smash windows or spray paint cheater on your Tesla. I'm here on official business. I held up the folder Patricia had given me. The one with the Novatech letterhead and the board seal and the words termination of employment in very official-looking font. I get to be the one who fires you. Board vote was unanimous, by the way. Congratulations on being the first CEO in tech history to lose his job because his wife was smarter than him. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might actually faint. No, Sarah. No, they can't. I built that company. You built it on my foundation, I interrupted. And foundations? They can be taken away. I pushed the folder into his chest, forcing him to take it. You have until 9:30 to clean out your office. Security will escort you. And Jason, if you take anything that isn't explicitly yours, if you touch one file, one email, one post-it note, I will personally ensure you spend the next decade in litigation. Are we clear? He just stood there, holding the folder like it was a live snake, his mouth opening and closing. Finally. The kids? Sarah? What am I supposed to tell Emma and Lucas? That their father is a failure? That their mother destroyed? I destroyed nothing, I said, my voice cold enough to freeze nitrogen. I built everything, and you stole it. The kids will understand that eventually. And if they don't, well, you'll have plenty of free time to explain it to them. Since you're unemployed now. I turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. There was always one more thing. Oh, and Jason. Jessica was fired an hour ago. Ethics violations, misuse of company resources, and some very interesting emails between her and your private investigator about hiding assets before the divorce. So your new life, your fresh start, it's gone. You're alone, just like you made me feel for 15 years. I walked back to my car without looking back, but I could feel his eyes on me, shocked, broken, finally understanding what he'd lost. Not the company, not the money, not even Jessica, but me. The woman who'd loved him enough to build him an empire and been repaid with erasure. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. Market opens in 10 minutes. Press release ready. Welcome aboard, Director Vance. Director Vance. I said it out loud, testing the sound of it, and smiled. Then I drove toward downtown San Francisco, toward the Novatech building that I'd helped pay for but never worked in, toward the office that should have been mine from the beginning. It was time to go to work. 3 months. That's how long it took to completely transform Novatech from Jason's ego project into something resembling an actual meritocracy. I won't lie, those first weeks were brutal. Half the executive team resented me for destroying their golden boy. The other half were terrified I'd encrypt the system again if they looked at me wrong. Good. Fear and respect look basically the same in a boardroom, and I'd take either one at this point. My first act as board member was to hire an external auditor. Not for the books, those were clean, surprisingly, but for the culture. And oh, what that audit found. Systemic pay gaps between male and female engineers. An executive retreat to Vegas that cost $300,000 and involved exactly 0 strategic planning. A sexual harassment complaint against Jessica that HR had buried because she was sleeping with the CEO. I fired 4 more executives in my first month. Not out of revenge, out of necessity. You can't build something new on a rotten foundation, and Jason had let the whole structure rot from the inside out. The press had a field day, of course. Silicon Valley's most dramatic divorce becomes corporate coup. The housewife who hijacked a $1 billion IPO. Forbes put me on the cover with the headline, "The Woman Behind the Code." I did exactly 1 interview with Bloomberg, because they'd been there for the crash, and I told them the truth. All of it. The garage, the lies, the erasure. By the time the article dropped, I had 17 job offers from venture capital firms wanting to fund my next venture, and a book deal I immediately turned down. I didn't want fame. I wanted what I'd always wanted, to build things that mattered and get credit for building them. The board meeting where they voted on the permanent CEO position was supposed to be contentious. Richard had warned me that several members were considering external candidates, someone with traditional leadership experience, which was code for a man who won't scare the investors. I'd prepared a presentation, revenue projections showing how the Nebula Core could expand into 3 new markets, a restructuring plan that would cut costs by 20% without layoffs, a diversity initiative that would triple our female engineering hires within 2 years. I walked into that boardroom ready for war. Richard opened the meeting with his typical formality. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here to discuss permanent leadership for Novatech. As you know, we've been operating with an interim structure since Mr. Vance's departure. Several board members have expressed interest in external candidates, while others believe the answer is already in this room. He looked directly at me. Director Vance, would you like to present your vision for the company? I stood up, connected my laptop to the screen, and took a breath. This was it. The moment 15 years had been building toward. Not revenge, not vindication, just the simple, radical act of being seen. But before I could start, the conference room door opened, and Jason walked in. Not walked, shuffled. He looked like shit. Unshaven, rumpled suit, eyes bloodshot like he'd been drunk or crying or both. The board members actually gasped. Richard stood up immediately. Mr. Vance, this is a closed meeting. You're no longer employed by this company, and you have no right— I know, Jason interrupted, his voice hoarse. I know I don't have the right, but I need to say something. To Sarah. To all of you. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt satisfied seeing him brought this low. Instead, I just felt tired. Jason, don't. Whatever you're about to say, just don't. It's over. He ignored me, stepped further into the room, and pulled out a chair. He didn't sit, just stood behind it, gripping the back like it was the only thing keeping him upright. I've spent the last 3 months in therapy, court-ordered, initially, because of the divorce. But I kept going because— He stopped, swallowed hard. Because I needed to understand how I became the kind of man who could steal from his wife, Who could erase the person he loved most? And you want to know what my therapist said? Nobody spoke. Even Richard had sat back down, apparently too stunned to maintain order. Jason continued. She said, "I didn't steal from you because I didn't love you, Sarah. I stole from you because I was terrified of how much smarter you were, how much more talented. Every time you solved a problem I couldn't even understand, every time investors looked at your work with awe, I felt myself disappearing, becoming irrelevant. So I took credit for your genius because I had no genius of my own. I made you invisible so I could feel visible. And that's..." His voice cracked. "That's unforgivable. I know that. I'm not here asking for forgiveness." "Then why are you here?" I asked quietly. He finally looked at me directly, and the pain in his eyes was so raw it actually hurt to see. "To tell the board that you should be CEO. Not interim, not temporary, permanent. Because you're the smartest person I've ever met, and I spent 15 years trying to hide that from the world. Don't let my insecurity rob you of one more second of what you deserve." He set something on the table, a manila folder, legal-sized, and slid it toward Richard. "Those are my shares. All of them. 30% of the company. I'm signing them over to Sarah. No strings, no conditions. Consider it 15 years of back pay for stolen credit." The room went so silent I could hear my own heartbeat. Richard opened the folder, scanned the documents, looked at Jason like he'd grown a second head. "Mr. Vance, these shares are worth approximately $600 million at current valuation. You're just giving them away." Jason smiled, and it was the saddest smile I'd ever seen. "I'm giving back what I stole. There's a difference." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Vote for her. Vote for Sarah. Because she's not just the woman behind the code. She is the code. She always was." And then he was gone, and I was standing there in a boardroom full of shocked executives, holding 30% of a company I'd built in a garage 15 years ago, finally getting everything I'd been owed. Richard cleared his throat. "Well, that was unexpected. All in favor of appointing Sarah Mitchell Vance as permanent CEO of Novatech." Every hand went up. Every single one. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my office, and yes, it's my office now, with my name on the door and my vision on the walls, watching the sun set over San Francisco Bay. The view from the 42nd floor is obscene. I can see the Golden Gate Bridge, Alcatraz, the whole glittering sprawl of a city that once seemed determined to keep women like me in garages and nurseries, and anywhere but the rooms where decisions get made. My assistant just left for the day. The floor is quiet. And for the first time in what feels like years, I can actually breathe. Novatech stock is up 47% since I took over. We launched the Nebula Core expansion into healthcare AI last month. My idea, my architecture, my name on every patent. And the early results are making investors weep with joy. Forbes called it the most successful CEO transition in recent tech history. I called it long overdue. Emma's at Stanford now, studying computer science, because apparently watching your mother burn down and rebuild a billion-dollar company in 6 months is inspirational. Lucas wants to be a lawyer. Specifically, he wants to make sure people get credit for their work. I've never been prouder. As for Jason, he took the divorce settlement, which was considerable, even after giving me those shares, and moved to Portland. Last I heard, he's teaching entrepreneurship at a community college and volunteering at a coding boot camp for underrepresented minorities. Maybe that therapist actually got through to him. Maybe losing everything was the only way he could find himself. I don't know. We don't talk. The kids see him every other weekend, and they say he seems different, quieter, more present. Good for him, I guess. But that's his journey, not mine. I learned something through all of this, something I wish I'd understood at 23 when I was coding in that garage, believing Jason's promises about we and us and together. You can't trust someone else to advocate for your value. You can't wait for permission to take up space, to claim credit, to demand what you're owed. The world will take everything you let it take. And if you're not willing to fight for yourself, to burn it all down if necessary, then you'll spend your whole life building empires for men who'll put their names on your foundations. The divorce papers are framed on my wall now, right next to my PhD, my patents, and that Forbes cover. A reminder, not of what Jason took, but of what I took back. Some people think it's petty. I think it's perfect. Because every time a young engineer walks into this office for a meeting, they see those papers, and they see my face on that magazine, and they understand. This is what happens when you underestimate a woman who knows her worth. You don't lose a wife, you lose an empire. Never underestimate the woman holding down the home. She might be holding up your entire world. And when she lets go, you'll fall faster than you can imagine. But here's something that might surprise you. Not every powerful woman got her strength from being betrayed. Some of them were born into darkness and learned to weaponize it. Take the next story, for instance. Imagine being sold, literally sold, like property, to pay off your father's gambling debts. Sold to the wealthiest family in the city, to be a glorified nurse for their heir who's been left paralyzed and mute after a mysterious accident. They think you're nobody. Disposable. A pretty face to tend to their broken son while they plot to steal his inheritance. What they don't know? He's not mute at all. He's been waiting, watching, planning his revenge. And you? You're not just a pawn. You're the queen he needed to burn his whole family to the ground. Some partnerships are built on love, others are built on calculated vengeance. And when two people who've been underestimated their whole lives finally find each other, the elite don't stand a chance.